purpose-built for the purpose. When the order was given, Armenian community leaders and intellectuals in urban areas were arrested and killed. Armenians were forced to leave their towns and deported south into the Syrian desert in forced marches. Up to 1.5 million Armenians died in the deserts of Syria.
Oh, that's really, oh, that's so sad. These are Armenian kids. Oh, dude, that's really, really sad to watch. All right, chapter 6. The final catastrophe.
If you Google the Young Turks, the result you're going to get are mainly these clowns, a group of American left-wing pundits who named their show after the Young Turks. Why you would do that, I don't know. The result, however, is that this is what people think the Young Turks are, when the Young Turks were in fact someone else. It all started in the 1800s. After several military defeats, the Ottomans invited foreign military staff to train their military officers in newly built cadet schools in places like Thessaloniki. A generation of young Turkish officer cadets, as well as a generation of Turkish students of law and medicine, had the opportunity to travel abroad and study the newest insights in technology, military leadership, and laws abroad. And it convinced them that something had to radically change if the empire was to be saved. They formed underground organizations such as the Committee for Union and Progress, but they became more commonly known as the Young Turks. These revolutionaries believed that for the Ottoman Empire to survive, it needed to reform and adapt to a new world where it would take its equal place amongst European empires. At the turn of the century, the Ottoman Empire fell into another period of crisis. The Austrians occupied Bosnia, and dozens of rebellions flared up by Greeks, Armenians, Albanians, Macedonians, and Arabs. Within all this mess, the Young Turks seized the opportunity to seize power in 1908. The Sultan was forced into signing away all political power and reinstate a constitution. The Ottoman Empire became a constitutional monarchy, but in no way became a democratic society. But their ascent to power did not slow down the decline. Instead, it encouraged outsiders to take advantage of the instability. An Albanian uprising, a war with the new Balkan states, and a war with Italy were the result. The Ottomans lost their last lands in the Balkans, as well as Libya and strategically important Aegean islands to the Italians. And the uprising in Albania foreshadowed what was to come in the following decade. After crushing the rebellion, the Young Turk government banned the Albanian language, Albanian alphabet, Albanian schools, and Albanian traditional dress. By 1913, power resided.
Okay, so seems like this was just a precedent, if you will. Okay. I'm saying that because, again, we got some stuff to talk about.
With a military triumvirate under the three Young Turk Pashas or military leaders, Talat Pasha, Enver Pasha, and Jamal Pasha. And with that, they also increasingly abandoned the idea that an empire of multiple ethnicities and faiths could successfully be preserved. Turkification was instead what they worked towards. As the Young Turks started to build a modern nation-state out of their empire, they sought new ideas and fictions around which to forge their new vision. The old ways, the ways of the religious hierarchy and Sharia, had to go. But what do we replace it with? The Young Turks adopted a nationalism through which they saw peoples in ethnic and lingual categories and classifications. They started using the word Turk when describing themselves and the land most Turks lived in. While the Ottoman nobility may have spoken Persian, the Young Turks popularized the use of the Turkish language as a rebellion against the corrupt royal elites. This was an
Okay, that makes a lot more sense now, because actually, in one of my Ottoman Empire reactions, I was asking whether or not the Ottoman Empire was a different entity from Turkey. Okay, this is actually really making things more clearer, because before, I just thought the Ottoman Empire was more or less just a Turkish thing, which to an extent, yeah, but as I slowly learned more and more, I realized that wasn't really the case, right?
An era of nationalist movements across the world trying to reaffirm and reassess cultural independence and identity. In Ireland, Gaelic cultural organisations formed and playwrights wrote pieces like Kathleen Houlihan, which had the distinct purpose of separating Irishness from Britishness and rediscovering and reinventing an Irish cultural identity. In
Crowd. But British also includes Irish. That's the whole point of British. So that's inaccurate to say. I think what he meant to say was English. Because British is just... There is no... The thing about British, right? It's more like a political term. Right? British... Anyone could be British. But not everyone... Like... It's more or less a political term to just describe people of Ireland, Scotland, England that are all a part of the Union, right? And then eventually that term would come to just mean the Commonwealth as Britain went and, spread its culture, which is just Irish, Scottish, English culture to its colonies, right? So, those colonies would also get the definition British too, plain and simple, which is why I find it kind of funny how a lot of people don't seem to get what British actually means. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but it's very self-explanatory, right? It's basic common sense, man. Like, I see people make comments like, "Oh, you're not British because you're white." I'm like, what? That's not even what British even means, but okay, whatever.
China, nationalists overthrew the Manchu monarchy and reinvented a new Han Chinese republican national identity. The Indian National Congress increasingly protested the British presidency.
Yeah, but the flag of that republic also included the ethnic groups crowd, right? I mean, I just learned that from my Epic History TV reaction of China, right? So they weren't like they weren't excluding those ethnic groups either. Although the CCP would change that.
Was no different than the child of its time. The Young Turks searched for national figures and heroes to reinvent a Turkish culture. The word Turk comes from a tribal name of the old Turkic era and means strength. They rediscovered a medieval Turkish poet and religious mystic, Yunus Emre, who broke with the standards and customs of his time by refusing to write poetry in Persian and refusing to preach religion in Arabic, instead doing so in the common Turkish language of the peasants. He was declared to be the father of the language, which, however, isn't really true. He just wrote in Turkish to reach more people. Young Turk leaders and politicians such as Ziya Gökalp defined the new Ottoman Empire as a society consisting of people who speak the same language, have the same education, and are united in their religious and aesthetic ideals. And the problem with that increasingly spreading nationalism was that it left no room for others. Your ethnicity, your language, your faith, and the way you practiced your faith became increasingly relevant in this society. The Young Turks became increasingly racist over time, looking down on Arabs, Armenians, Greeks, Assyrians, and Alawites with increasing racialized contempt, as a people who supposedly refused to become part of the modern world or as a foreign and enemy entity from within. With passing time, they became increasingly volatile and also delusional. Enver Pasha dreamt of a great Turkic empire stretching from the Balkans to China that he would conquer for a unified ethnically Turkish empire. The idea in itself is nonsensical. The Turkic cultural sphere contains various different languages and cultural expressions. Even the notion of a Turkish race, after centuries of assimilations and integrations of different peoples, is purely nonsensical. Yet those facts did not delude the delusions of grandeur that some within the Young Turk ranks had come to believe. A Turkish empire was to be built, and those within it who were not Turks would have to assimilate into becoming Turks or go. The Young Turk.
Okay, I'm gonna talk about something quick here. It's funny because assimilation, I know what assimilation is. Many people can get assimilated for many reasons. It's funny because, I'm an assimilated person, right? I'm an assimilated person. Well, not really, because I'm also mix of European and Indian descent. But every like the thing about Barbados is that the people who went to Barbados, right? And this is why I will always like call myself English / British. Is there was I can't even pronounce the word Anglicization or Anglification, whatever the heck you want to say, and due to the fact that no one lived on Barbados and Barbados is an uninhabited island, which is my country I'm talking about, of course, this assimilation process was relatively easy, right? Because when the Africans who left Africa came to Barbados, their descendants would be born on a completely British environment and grew up around a completely British culture and British people, right? Literally. I mean, that's literally why Barbados is literally called Little England for a reason. And the thing about Barbados is no other Caribbean island is like that. No other Caribbean. That's the very interesting part is this, because the Caribbean islands, they had natives, then they had the Europeans fighting over it. They couldn't really assimilate into one whole thing proper, but due to the fact that there's not really any natives on Barbados, natives didn't bother to set up a permanent settlement there, and the British turned the whole place into a literal fortress, so no Europeans couldn't even touch the island, not even pirates. The place just became British naturally over time. Also, Barbados was one of the original British colonies too, right? Which even led it to become more British. And I say this because it's funny, because I see some Turkish people do this too. Not all. Here's the thing that I realize about Turkish people. It's like there's either sensible ones that know how to use their heads, are pretty smart, and there's the ones that are just completely off the rails, right? Frankly speaking. But I see a lot of Turkish people, or just other people in my comments who just can't seem to just fathom the idea that assimilation is a thing, who will just go in my comments and just comment like, oh, you're not British, or you're not English, blah 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 blah, right? And it's funny because these people will claim to like history, claim to be interested in history, but just can't accept someone who's a product of assimilated history. I had like one person, one Turkish guy who did acknowledge that I was an assimilated person, an Anglified person, right? But he was just trying to throw an insult at me. I was like, well, at least you know something accurate. I'll give you that. But that's the case of assimilation, where it's not really like dirty, right? But most of the time, assimilation really and truly, it's like a flip of a coin. It's either very messy, very untidy. There's a lot of bad things going on that cause the people to assimilate, or it's just a case of Barbados where, I mean, even then you could say that, oh well, slavery was going on, blah 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 blah, yada yada. Yes, but before the whole transatlantic slave trade became a thing, Barbados was still a colony. Barbados was settled way before the transatlantic slave trade happened. So actually, Barbados used to be majority white. And it's when it's originally settled, it was majority white. I think it took like 100 years or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, for black people to be the majority population. So, there's also that. I don't know. People think that Britain just went and just freaking colonized the island just to freaking put it as only a place for black slave. No, the thing about Barbados was that it was a settlement colony. It was a settlement colony turned into a slave colony when the rich elite class of Britain realized how profitable the soil was. But before that had even happened, all those, white British people were already there for 100 years. Turned the island that was uninhabited, into an enclave of Britain, really and truly. So, just pointing that out because, I don't know, some people just really can't seem to accept that I am English or British, whatever the hell you want to call me.
Turks aligned themselves with the German Empire, dressed like German officers and generals, and saw the German Empire as an exemplar model for how to build their new empire. As such, they helped drag the empire into the First World War, which first and foremost exposed one thing: their incompetence. Jamal Pasha marched south, intent to take Egypt from the British, lost, got bogged down, and took out his frustrations by mass hangings of Arabs and Assyrians, which resulted in the Arabs increasingly despising their Turkish overlords.
Okay, I'm starting to notice a pattern with these people and just completely committing atrocities against other minorities.
Enver Pasha had the genius idea of invading Russia without preparing for the Russian winter, with predictable results. He came back and instead of taking responsibility, blamed the Armenians.
Alright, this is the interesting part. This is where stuff gets interesting.
Within the
folks.
new nationalist vision for the Ottoman Empire the Young Turks had, the Armenians were, by not being Turkish and by not being Muslims, already separated from the remaining population as different. To emphasize the difference, even though claiming to abandon the old hierarchy of the Ottoman Empire, the Young Turks took advantage of it by branding the Armenians as kuffar, or unbelievers, as beneath the Muslim population. The Armenians never rose above the status of being second-class citizens, even as the Ottoman Empire reformed. After the failed rebellions of the late 1800s, even the Young Turks denied them legal rights and equality with the remaining population.
Wow, so... I mean, I had people in my comments telling me, oh, but the Armenians, bro, the Armenians were, well a part of the Ottoman Empire, I'm hearing something different here. Oh, can't wait to see what some of these Turkish people are going to have to say in my comments.
As the Ottoman Empire was at war and had suffered significant military defeats, the Armenians were an easy pick as scapegoats for all that had gone wrong. In response to a rebellion in Van that had been artificially aggravated by the Ottoman army, the Interior Minister of War made the decision to mass deport the Armenians. Enver Pasha, on May 2, 1915, gave his seal of approval to this via letter. The Young Turks sought to remove the Armenians for nationalist reasons, on the grounds of removing an ethnicity from their society. But to achieve this, they went by a different means, appealing to the Islamic beliefs of the majority population. They called for a jihad against the non-believers and appealed to people to rid the empire of the kuffar. Lists were made of Armenian intellectuals and community leaders, camps established, soldiers were given orders, militias were armed, and camps built for the purpose. When the order was given, Armenian community leaders and intellectuals in urban areas were arrested and killed. Armenians were forced to leave their towns and deported south into the Syrian desert in forced marches. Up to 1.5 million Armenians died in the deserts of Syria.
Oh, that's really, oh, that's so sad. These are Armenian kids? Oh, dude, that's really, really sad to watch.
Forced to march through the deserts or left in camps with neither food or water, they succumbed to thirst, hunger, and disease.
Oh my gosh, bro. Holy shit, man.
Every genocide has its deniers. However, the traces of what happened cannot simply be wiped away. Travel through eastern Anatolia today and you will see the empty Armenian churches wherever you may go. The Armenian genocide is denied by the Turkish government and Turkish academia to this very day, and the society that cannot confront the demons of its past is a society that will be haunted by those demons. As such, we will encounter this genocide again in later chapters. The genocide in the end didn't help the Young Turks change the tide of war. As the Russian Empire collapsed, the Armenians in the east broke off to form their own republic, now even more hostile towards them. The Arabs rebelled en masse and harassed the Ottomans from Arabia to Damascus, something the British would take advantage of. And the British Expeditionary Force...
Okay, he's talking about the British Expeditionary. Okay, let's talk about the Armenian genocide real quick. Yeah, I said this before, I'm gonna say it again. Look. I don't think most Armenians were collaborating with Russians. I don't. I said, do I think that some Armenians were collaborating with Russia? Yes. But I don't think most Armenians were collaborating with Russia. I had a Turkish guy that I was arguing with, and I kind of just stopped responding to him because he was kind of just, not even kind of, he was just more or less a moron. Because he literally, like, tried to say, like, basically said, oh, they had it coming, which is stupid. Like, seriously, that's stupid to say, oh, they had it coming. Oh, Armenians were also targeting, like, Turkish people in the communities and whatnot or whatever. Again, I'm not denying that happened. But what I am denying is most Armenians were doing that. That's what I'm denying here. Because this whole argument was, oh, the Armenians were attacking and being hostile towards Turkish people too. So that was the reason why the Young Turks did that. Yeah, pal. You think a 5-year-old kid cares about a grown-ass Turkish person or a whole war? Bruh, no, no. And he talked about gangs, bro. Sure, those gangs existed, but there's a big difference between gangs, an organized group, and an entire population of people, right? So again, I understand the idea behind that. Yeah, there was probably some Armenian collaborators going on, but like to overly generalize and literally just try to, I think the way how Kraut described the Armenian genocide was very oversimplified, but if we take what he said at face value, the whole, he literally just wanted to get rid of all the Armenians. He literally said that the Pasha even gave the seal of approval. There's no other way to put it. Like, so, yeah, that's when I'm like, yeah, no. If it was more something along the lines of trying to find the collaborators or whatever, I'm not saying like as an excuse. No, I'm saying like if the Turks had not just decided to get rid of all that's the problem. The problem is that they just want to get rid of all the Armenians. It's like, dude, innocent people. It's like whenever people say like, oh, we should just give prisoners garbage food, or we should allow the death penalty for all crimes, or something along those lines. I've heard people unironically say these things. The problem with that is there's innocent people who've been wrongly accused that should not be there, right? A lot of people in prison are actually innocent for something that they've never done, right? That's the problem, right? So you're advocating for a death penalty. You're basically advocating for murder, literally, right? And that's the problem with the Armenian genocide. You're literally just, if you try to say that the Young Turks didn't like do anything wrong, or try to justify what the Young Turks did, you can't. You can't. I understand the idea behind it, because like I said before, I'm certain that there were some Armenians that were 100% with the Russians. Oh yeah, definitely. Armenia and Russia has a close relationship. I'm not denying that. But not everyone is doing that. Not everybody's doing that, bro. So it's I mean, that's how I look at it, right? This was a cope. I do agree. The Armenian genocide was a more or less a scapegoat / cope for the Young Turks, to just try and cope with their failures in the war. However, if you do look at the start of the video, you know, the Young Turks seem to just kind of take out their anger and loss on pretty much any minority, and it seemed like the Armenians were wrong place, wrong time, right? We saw how at the start he tried to invade Egypt, that failed, and he, you know, took out, you know, his cope and scapegoat on the local Assyrian and Arab populations in that region. It seemed like wherever the Ottomans or the Young Turks, I'm saying Young Turks because it seemed like this was uniquely a Young Turk thing. I'm not saying Turkish people. No. Listen to what I'm saying closely. I'm not saying Turkish people. I'm saying the Young Turks, because it seems like this is this thing. Even though the Armenians were second-class citizens up until this point, I don't really think the actual Ottoman government would have actually, like, the previous Ottoman government before the Young Turks would have genocided them, even if they were. The radicalized Young Turks, just wherever they went and they lost, they just seemed to take out their anger on the local population where they lost, more or less, to put it. Like, and you know, that disaster in Russia, who was there? That was where Armenians were. So who did they blame? The Armenians. And, you know, due to the fact that the Armenians were already second-class citizens, like Kraut said, distinct, you know, it was a recipe for disaster, right? That's a Caribbean saying. It's a recipe. I don't know if other people say that, but it's a recipe for disaster. Okay, I'm pretty sure if they weren't distinct, if they were Muslim, you know, like the other ethnic groups that he talked about, that the Young Turks more or less committed atrocities to, it would not have been bad. But due to the fact that the Armenians were so distinct, it was extra bad. It was extra bad. I don't know, human psychology, that's a real thing, right? The Armenians were more or less the black sheep of the late Ottoman Empire, so of course they would get the worst treatment, right? From the Young Turks, right? That's how I view that, really and truly. They were trash, they were incompetent, and they just took out their anger on whoever they could to justify their incompetence. But with the Armenian genocide, though, that was a genocide. You can't really look at it anyhow. It is.
Took Basra and Baghdad. In the end, the Young Turks only signed their own death warrant with what they had done. The world had noticed what had happened, and for what they had done, they would, in case of defeat, not be able to merely surrender, but would be wanted men for the crimes that they had committed.
Yeah, bro. And that's the thing is, like what Kraut said, you know, you could go to Eastern Anatolia and you could see like the abandoned Armenian churches, bro, and stuff. Like, bro, churches, bro, really? Like, again, that has nothing to do with the war. Like, come on now. Chapter 7.
Our story, the story of modern Turkey, begins here on the beach in the Dardanelles. in a place called Gallipoli. And to fully understand and appreciate, we need to go back to be introduced to the man who would make and shape modern Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. He was born as Mustafa in 1881 in Salonika, which is today's Thessaloniki in modern-day Greece. It might seem weird to you, but in the Ottoman Empire, commoners did not have last names, only the royal family did. Growing up in Ottoman Greece as a Turk would impact his views in later life. The experience of being part of a minority in a majority culture, but also in that he was exposed to the nationalism and ideas of the Greeks around him at the time. Not just if Greece should be an independent state or not, but whether it should be a Hellenic kingdom or a Hellenic republic. In school he would excel at maths and prove to be a very intelligent kid, resulting in his teacher giving him his second name, Kemal, from the Arabic word for excellence. After school he would enroll in an Ottoman military academy in northern Macedonia and later in the Ottoman Military Staff College in Istanbul, pursuing a career as an army officer. It was through his path through the military institutions of the empire that he met and joined the various revolutionary movements around the Young Turks. He himself also got the chance to travel abroad and also formed revolutionary organizations such as in Damascus with the intention of reforming the empire. He was in many ways a rebel. He smoked a lot and even drank a lot of alcohol, which was highly forbidden in the empire. He read illegal literature, discussed with his comrades how the empire should be reformed, and at one point even landed in jail for his activities. But there were big differences between him and the other mostly Young Turk officers. Most importantly, he was not a Young Turk. Neither did he believe in their ideas and plans. The Young Turks mainly looked for their inspiration on how to reform the empire to the German Empire and to German nationalism as something to copy. The strict militaristic state hierarchy of what was basically a military dictatorship was in their opinion the only way to save the Ottoman Empire. Mustafa Kemal, however, disagreed. He was more interested in what he had seen in France, in particular the French Republic. He saw the pluralistic political system of the French Republic and its desire for progress and advancement in society and the sciences as a better model to copy.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, again, the Young Turks, I think it would be more accurate to put them in a distinct thing. The actions that they did, every single thing, I would say, yeah, Young Turks, not like Turkey did that or Ottomans. No. You know, it's like saying whenever I hear people say like, oh, I had someone in my comments who said that, oh, Russia ethnically cleansed Crimea, all of the Crimean Tatars. And I was like, yeah, no, that's wrong to say. One, because the Soviet Union is a Russia, and number two, Stalin, who isn't even Russian, he's Georgian, was paranoid that the Crimeans were collaborating with the Germans, much kind of similar to what happened with the Armenians, actually. Just the fact that the Crimea was under German control for a very long time, right? So he deported them, right? Yeah, I don't look at that as a Russian thing. I look at it as a Soviet thing. More accurate to say, but let's continue, right? Okay, watching this does give me a more of a different perspective on the whole like late Ottoman Empire and thing. It's clear to me.
He learned to read and speak French, and as such, while the Young Turks read the translations of Prussian militarists, Mustafa Kemal preferred reading the works of French revolutionary and Enlightenment philosophers. In particular, his favorite one, Auguste Comte, a positivist who strictly rejected all forms of metaphysical thought, advocated for the advancement of society in thinking and actions reasoned and based on scientific facts and research, and in particular, advocated for mankind to liberate itself by abandoning all forms of religious ballast and superstition. Generally, in the history of the last 200 years, Comte's writing had more of an impact than most are even aware of. They are basically the foundation of modern French secularism known as laïcité, and you will find one of his quotes about achieving order and progress, at least partially, on the flag of the Brazilian Republic, whose founders were leaders and admirers of Comte. But most significant for our story, they shaped the political thinking of the young officer cadet Mustafa Kemal. He believed the Young Turks didn't go far enough, that they still clung on to old and outdated traditions, that their thinking was still by and large backward, that the German Empire they modeled themselves after was also backward, and that only radical social and state reforms modeled after European republics such as France would be the solution. You might have even heard or read some of his quotes from this era.
There is only one civilization, the European civilization. There is no second civilization. Civilization is the European civilization. And it must be established here, with all of its thorns and roses.
And there was a second large point of disagreement between Mustafa Kemal.
I don't know. I disagree with that. I don't think the whole world needs to be Eurocentric. Imagine if we had like a Turkish civilization. I mean, technically we do. Yeah, Central Asia is all Turkey and Azerbaijan as well. But I mean, we don't need to be. No, no, get out of here. Ugh, I can hear all the freaking Europeans and their superiority complex running to my comment section. Ugh.
Probably the biggest one with which Mustafa Kemal was also largely ahead of his time. He didn't believe that the empire should continue. He believed that the age of empires and colonialism was coming to an end. He also rejected ideas like Enver Pasha's Turanism, the idea of a pan-Turkish empire stretching from China to the Balkans, as fantasies and delusions. Instead, he advocated for a small Turkish solution. The empire should disband, and it should give up rule over the Arabs and the peoples of the Balkans. He also believed that empire held nations back, that for the Ottomans being tied into the Islamic world, in particular the Arab world, tied the Turks into religious-based political and social backwardness. Therefore, Turkey should give up the idea of being the leaders of the Islamic world, reject all cultural influences from there, draw borders around the smaller, more compact, and mostly ethnically and lingually unison Turkish homeland, instead of seeking deeper ties into Arabia and Iran, and to build new bridges into Europe and North America and rebuild itself as a modern Turkish nation-state. By the time of the Young Turk coup, Mustafa Kemal had risen to the rank of colonel, and by the entry of the First World War was one of the most experienced military leaders of the Ottoman army, with combat experience in the war with Italy and the Second Balkan War. But because of his beliefs, he was kept away from any political power or even any significant military post. His relationship with the Young Turk government was strenuous at best.
Yeah,
eventually, he was given a post commanding a division in Gallipoli, and it was there where he proved his worth. Unlike many of his Young Turk contemporaries, he didn't just dress like a soldier, but actually was one. He had a better understanding of modern warfare and the defensive tactics of trench warfare. When the British sent an army of Australian and New Zealand troops to take the Dardanelles and Istanbul with the intention of knocking the Ottomans out of the war, he correctly anticipated where the attacks would take place, to then organize and command a successful defense and what would be the first Ottoman victory of the war.
Yeah, again, the Young Turks just seem to be extremely horrible and just trash overall. You know, I don't think everyone would agree with them. I don't like the way how, because before, keep in mind, this is from my perspective. You're hearing my reaction, so I'm giving my perspective. Because before, the way how I learned about the Ottoman Empire at World War I and all that, right, is the Turkish, you know, were bad. The Turkish, you know, genocide Armenians as a cope, as a scapegoat, you know, that's all I hear. So from my perspective, I was like, oh, okay. So that's what the Turks did. Okay. But now that I hear this, I'm like, yeah, no, this is not a Turkish thing. This is just a radical thing. Any radical person would honestly do something like this, which the Young Turks were radical. And of course, they were incompetent.
Prospects as the German allies, but also the Young Turks, had to recognize his potential. But far more important for later years, the fact that he was fighting in Gallipoli kept him clear of any involvement in the Armenian genocide that was taking place at the same time. 16 and given command of part of the army in the Caucasus, where the Russians had recently launched an invasion of Anatolia. Under his command, the Russians were defeated at Bitlis, halting any further Russian advances. This victory made it abundantly clear that Gallipoli had not been a fluke, and that he was one of the most competent commanders in the Ottoman army. By 1917, he was put in charge of Ottoman forces in the Levant, facing the British and the Arab revolt. But there were no victories to be found there. After years of incompetent leadership under Jamal Pasha and his attempts to terrorize the Arabs into obedience, the Ottomans had all but lost control over Arabia. Jerusalem fell to the British, as did Basra and Baghdad, and the Arabs were in full revolt in the remaining land.
There's a lot of interesting stories of Caribbean soldiers who literally fought their way in Palestine. Interestingly enough, there used to be a lot of there's actually quite a lot of interviews. It's kind of hard to find now, but those people are long dead because this is World War One, of course. But I was watching some documentaries a long time ago about that. Very interesting stuff.
By 1918, the Arab revolt had their biggest victory when they took Damascus and started marching on Aleppo. Faced with what would have been certain defeat, Mustafa Kemal decided to instead save his army and organized a retreat back into Anatolia. It was at this point, literally in the same week that Mustafa Kemal retreated his army into Anatolia, in fact, that the Sultan, Mehmet VI, reached out to the Allied powers for peace and had an armistice signed. The three Young Turk Pashas, who had dragged the Ottoman Empire into this catastrophe in the first place, as well as conducted the Armenian genocide, all fled abroad to escape being held accountable.
Yeah, of course. This is a them thing. I don't see this as a Turkish thing. Yeah, of course they would flee. They know what they did. They know what they did, bro. Okay, it makes more sense why well, in my personal opinion, it makes more sense why the modern Turkish government doesn't recognize the Armenian genocide as a genocide. Because if they recognize it as a genocide, I mean, it is a genocide. I'm not saying it's not. But I'm going to give a very interesting perspective here. Just hear me out. If they recognize it as a genocide, they're basically saying that Turkey, which wasn't even a country at this time, did the genocide and had full responsibility over the genocide, when that would be kind of inaccurate to say. Okay, that would be very inaccurate to say. Sure, the Young Turks were Turks, but this is still the Ottoman Empire, and this is a radical movement. I don't even think everyone in the empire agreed with this. It's much like how the Soviet Union, like, most people didn't really agree with the Soviet Union, and people like to blame Russians for a whole bunch of things that the Soviets did that had absolutely nothing to do with Russians.
Which in the end didn't help them much. Talat Pasha was shot dead by an Armenian in Berlin in 1921. Enver Pasha was killed by an Armenian Red Army officer in the Caucasus in 1922. Jamal Pasha was killed in Georgia in 1922 by a group of free Armenians. And many other senior...
All Armenians, bro. All Armenians. Bro, 5-star. This man was 5-star. GTA 5-star by the Armenians. I don't blame him. But here's the one thing, though, that I will say. Turkey and Armenia, the relationship today, the modern relationship today is icky. I wouldn't even say icky. Like the time where Armenia had an earthquake and Turkey blocked any help from coming to Armenia. Why would they do that? I don't know. I don't know why Turkey would do that. That's very like I don't know. It's just vindictive, I guess. Just out of bad blood. I don't know. I see no logical reason or objective reason for something like that. I'm putting this out because I'm still aware that Turkey still has a very kind of a bad relationship with Armenia. To be honest, and even with the whole Azerbaijan war, where Azerbaijan won, got back his internationally recognized lands that Armenia took from it. Even though those places were largely Armenian, but shitty Soviet border drawing purposely done by Stalin put that into Azerbaijan's hands, but that's a whole different topic. it's even though Azerbaijan is still being hostile towards Armenia, nobody isn't really like paying attention, right? Nobody's really paying attention to that. And also, like Turkey is still supporting Azerbaijan in that. Sure, you could support Azerbaijan by getting back its internationally recognized lands, but when Azerbaijan is still being hostile towards Armenia and still pressure Armenia, and you're still supporting that, yeah, I can't really defend that, to be honest, really and truly. I'm gonna be so honest with you. The only reason why Armenia even exists as a country today is because of Russia. If Russia wasn't there, both Turkey and Azerbaijan would literally just wipe Armenia from the map and probably just ethnically cleanse every single Armenian there. I'm gonna be so honest.
Young Turk figures involved in the Armenian genocide who had fled abroad were killed by Armenians. It is also often forgotten today that in the aftermath,
it's a whole operation.
Action was taken against many of the Ottoman officials who had partaken in the Armenian genocide in the defeated Ottoman Empire. This was demanded by the Allies and also endorsed by Mustafa Kemal, who wrote,
"It is our main wish that the rule of law be applied impartially, and that complete justice begins. Since the responsibility in our country is equally shared by young and old, the punishment should not only remain on paper, thereby remaining only propaganda which can lead to many unnecessary discussions, but should be carried out, since this would successfully impress the foreign element."
You know, it's funny because even Mustafa Kemal acknowledges that this was a genocide. Yeah, of course, you know, a bunch of distinct criminals caused that upon themselves. Yeah, this was a crime. You know, they had to be persecuted. You know, that's how I view that.
The court-martials set
Not all Turks were like that, honestly.
Were, however, lackluster, designed in a way that cabinet members could influence outcomes and sentencing, and many of those involved managed to escape punishment. By 1920,
oh wow,
in the suburb of Sèvres, Sultan Mehmed VI was made to sign the Treaty of Sèvres, a peace treaty even harsher than the Treaty of Versailles was on the Germans. The Ottoman Empire's lands in Arabia were to be divided up between the British and the French. Eastern Anatolia would be divided up amongst the newly formed Armenian Republic and the new Kurdish state. Southern Anatolia would be given to the French. Eastern Anatolia divided amongst the Italians and Greeks. The Dardanelles and Istanbul would become a formerly international zone, however under British occupation, so basically part of the British Empire. The Turks would be restricted to a small remaining rump state in northern Anatolia, which was 15% of what the empire was before the war, and under a de facto colonial supervision. Adding to that were crippling reparations, and it became abundantly clear that the Turks were to have their lands divided up as colonies to the victors. This treaty was unacceptable to Mustafa Kemal, who in mid-1919 was tasked with reorganizing the Ottoman army to crush any resistance against the treaty and the Sultan in the remaining rump state. Instead, he assembled a congress and from the small town of Ankara declared independence from the Sultan's government and proclaimed to resist the foreign occupation of Anatolia.
The Sultan just accepted that? Bro, what the hell?
The Turkish War of Independence.
What?
That war, from the onset, seemed absolutely hopeless. The Turks were on their own and pretty much surrounded. The Greeks used this crisis to invade Anatolia in an attempt to build a greater Greece. The Armenians also invaded in an attempt to take the lands inhabited by Armenians before the genocide. The French army occupied vast parts of southern Anatolia, intent on dismantling Ottoman state and cultural structures. A large British fleet was anchored in Istanbul, and the Kurds by now were eager to build their own promised state. But a series of events at the beginning of this conflict pushed things into Mustafa Kemal's favor. The British found oil in the Kurdish homelands of northern Mesopotamia, which led to them betraying the Kurds. Instead of giving them their own homeland, they clustered them into the new colonial administration of Iraq under Arab overlords.
Yeah, classic British Empire. Why am I not surprised? You know something about the British Empire is that the British Empire, it was kind of a force for good, but when there's profit, yeah, that goes out the window. Oh my gosh, bro. Again, and this is not all British people. Actually, this is actually a good comparison to do. Actually, the British Empire, because everyone likes to blame all British people for the British Empire. No, the British Empire was more or less just a rich people elite empire, where the rich people were the ones doing essentially all of the saying, all of the dirtiness, all of the dirty work. That was basically the British Empire, while the rest of the poor people suffered. You can literally draw a parallel between that and the Young Turks who did the Armenian genocide. Not all Turks did it. No, you think a poor Turkish person had anything to do with the Armenian genocide or cared? No. You think a poor British person has anything to do with slavery or the transatlantic slave trade or care? No. So same thing, just different situations. Just elite people with too much power who go way out of control. But whatever, let's continue.
Remaining Kurds in Anatolia consequently sided with Mustafa Kemal, who promised them equality under Turkish rule and the resurrection of the Caliphate. Things looked far tougher in the east, as the Turks seemed to be in for a long protracted war with the Armenians. However, in 1920, out of the blue, the Soviet Union invaded Armenia and annexed it. With that, there were no more threats from the east. To the south, the French got bogged down in the guerrilla war with the local Turkish population.
That was lucky.
And in early 1920 were defeated by the Turkish National Army under Mustafa Kemal's command, leaving them with no other choice but the retreat back into French-occupied Syria. By far the biggest threat were the Greeks, who seized control of Anatolian lands that were actually promised to the Italians and marched into central Anatolia with one victory after another. The Greeks got close to taking Ankara but were halted and pushed back by 1921 under Mustafa Kemal's command. The war ended in 1922 with the Greeks retreating and the burning of the Greek city of Smyrna, which would later be rebuilt and renamed to Izmir. The end of the war with the Greeks pretty much solidified a Turkish victory, and the British, rather than fight, decided to abandon Istanbul and make peace with the Turks. This victory was a triumph that would cement Mustafa Kemal as a national hero even before he had established his state. There are only 5 countries in the world that avoided being colonized, most through concessions and alliances with other empires or by becoming colonial empires themselves. Turkey is unique amongst them, in that under Mustafa Kemal's leadership it is the only one which managed to avoid colonization by fighting those who sought to colonize it, and more importantly, doing so on its own and outnumbered. It made Mustafa Kemal the savior of the nation and the revered leader and anti-colonial hero, even outside of Turkey, where many leaders in Arabia, Iran and Pakistan would seek to copy him in the future. This war, however, also significantly
I did not know that people try to copy him.
Makeup of Anatolia. There used to be a Greek population of up to 2 million people in Anatolia before the First World War, and with the burning of Izmir, the last big Greek population center disappeared. You can today still travel throughout the coastlines of Anatolia and you will find empty Greek towns and villages whose population packed and fled between 1914 and 1922. In the peace agreement, the League of Nations ordered a population exchange.
Insane.
1.5 million Greeks were to leave Turkey and head for Greece, while 1 million Turks were to leave Greece and head for Turkey. It is important to note that today this would be considered to be ethnic cleansing, but at the time it was seen as a legitimate policy measure to guarantee peace. But, as we would see later, it didn't. What it did, however, do was change Anatolia, which for millennia had been a place of multiple cultures and faiths. The Christian population was reduced to a mere 2%, and the Anatolia Mustafa Kemal inherited was a by and large ethnically and religiously monomorphic society of Sunni Muslim Turks. Thousands of these Turks watched in late 1923 as the last British ships and troops left Istanbul. They all still wore the traditional Islamic headdress for men called the fez. Most of them probably had no idea that they were witnessing the dawn of a new age and the radical break with the past, unprecedented not just for Turkey, but in all of human history. On the 29th of October 1923, the Turkish Republic was declared after the Sultanate had been abolished in the previous year. The only thing that this republic would keep from the past was the flag.
Very, very excellent. There's something I also wanted to point out there. The League of Nations. People think the League of Nations was useless, but there's a lot of things that the League of Nations actually did. And what he pointed out there, the League of Nations ordered for the ethnic swap of Turks and Greeks to go to their respective mother countries. I didn't even know that the League of Nations did that. And there's a lot of things that most people don't even know that the League of Nations did, where it was actually quite useful. But aside from that, you made it all the way to the end of the video. If you like what I have to say, like and subscribe. If you're an active viewer of mine and you know you have a lot of suggestions for me, you have videos that you want me to react to, you know, guys, I'm a very busy person. I have a lot going on. I'm actually going to work after I record this, actually, you know, so you know, you could join my membership for 99 cents a month. Again, purposely made it affordable for you all. Thank you to the 3 people who joined already. You know, they can attest that, you know, I'm giving the utmost priority, you know, and effort. Okay, so they can vouch for me, and they do vouch for me, so I thank y'all for that. You know, if you like my Turkey reactions and you have more, you can always comment down below. You could click on my channel. I have a bunch of Turkey reactions there too, or you could just watch my other reactions on my channel though. But thank you for watching. Special thanks to these 3 members right here. Your support and dedication keeps me having a drive to make these videos. Thank you.